Julie Saunders.
I'm Jan Wilson. Julie and I both have experience as school librarians, and we've worked together as district library leaders.
In each episode, we'll dive into our profession with interviews and meaningful content to inspire you. We're not experts,
but we're pretty close.
The ideas and opinions shared by any host, guest, or listener are their own and do not represent those of any respective school district.
Welcome to Library Exchange. This episode is sponsored by Gladys Autry with Mackin Educational Resources.
For over 40 years, Mackin has provided kindergarten through 12th grade libraries and classrooms with access to over 4 million titles and makerspace resources with exceptional customer service.
For more information, visit mackin.com today. Hi, Julie. So there's not really time for chit chat today because we want to have time for our 3 guests.
Right. One of our most popular episodes was the Findability episode with staff from the Gwinnett County Public Library. So we're going to continue with that topic by discussing it with school librarians who have been successful at implementing Findability into their collections.
As a reminder, Findability is a word-based classification system for nonfiction. Our guest today, with input from a district librarian committee, used the public library's model as a guide. So here we go. With us today are 3 school librarians who all work for the largest school district in the state of Georgia.
High school librarian Lorraine McCullough is the winner of the 2019 Exemplary Library Media Program in Georgia. In 2020, Carrie Card won Teacher of the Year at her middle school as the school librarian.
Yet librarians are teachers, people.
And at the elementary level is Nicole Solanki, the 2023 Library Media Specialist of the Year for her district.
Welcome to all 3 of you. We're excited that you're here today on Library Exchange. Please provide us with some demographics about your schools. And let's start with Lorraine.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. My name is Lorraine McCullough, and I work in a high school where I serve 9th through 12th grade, roughly 2,400 students, and over half of our students are Hispanic.
Great. Thank you. Carrie, your turn to tell us a little bit about your middle school.
I'm Carrie Card. I work at the middle school level. We serve grades 6 to 8. I've actually been at this school for 22 years, but I've served as the media specialist for 10, and there are about 1,800 kids in the middle school.
Large schools. Last but not least, Nicole, tell us about your elementary school.
Hi, yes, I'm Nicole Solanki, and we serve grades pre-K to 5th grade at my elementary school. And we have about 1,100 students, pretty large. And there are 38 languages spoken in my school.
Wow.
Awesome. So, Julie, I'm so excited that we have librarians from each level on this topic.
Me too. Great
I think this is like groundbreaking to have this. But anyway, let's begin with the why. So, what made each of you decide to adopt the Findability model? So I'll get started with the elementary perspective. Nicole.
So I decided to do Findability because our middle school started off with the project and we vertically team a lot. And I thought, well, if my kids are going to be going to middle school, I want them to be prepared. And so we thought, let's get them started early.
Okay. Vertical alignment is important. What about you, Carrie? What was your why?
Well, I do remember the district library media specialist meetings. We had one at the public library, and I was so impressed by how the public library set up the media center. And as I have 2 floors in my media center, my lower floor is nonfiction, and it did not get as much traction as my upstairs fiction section. So I called the district leaders. I said, I really want to do this. I really want to get started. And they were fantastic, but they said, well, we want to look into it too, so please be flexible. And I began changing up the media center to do that so that it was more dynamic and it was easier for the kids. And I got kids upstairs and downstairs instead of all hanging out in the fiction section upstairs.
Point.
So it was really because I wanted the whole media center to be used and make it a little more dynamic.
Good. 2-floor library. That's another topic for another episode.
Yeah. Nicole will say I wanted to do it because I was tired of going up and down the stairs all the time.
I can't imagine. What's your why, Lorraine?
So similar to Carrie, I absolutely fell in love with how the public library had organized their nonfiction, and I was so excited to bring it to the high school. Over half of our students have been served with ESOL services or are currently being served, and the findability method just really seemed like it was going to make it easier for our students to search and find what they wanted. And I just wanted to spark curiosity. I wanted them to be able to walk around and see the different subjects and pick up something that they were interested in.
That's great. So all three of you spoke about the importance of vertical alignment, and I love that you all mentioned your main focus was students.
Absolutely. So I'm really interested in the details of how you did this. I know a lot of school librarians out there are interested in partaking in this project and they want to know where to begin. So if you could give some details about the time it took, the changes you had to make in your library catalog, the actual movements, maybe of the actual books, the icons that you use or signage, anything that would be helpful for other school librarians to actually get started on a project like this. I would really like to start with the middle school perspective. So, Carrie, can you provide us any details that would be helpful for other school librarians?
Yes. Well, the first thing, and I think one of the most important things, is heavy weeding and removing the books that are no longer circulated, no longer looked great. I had a huge biography section that did not move, and removing it and taking athletes or inventors and putting them in a topic where the kids actually saw them and were more interested in them. So weeding was number one. I worked on it for a whole year. I did not do it in one big swift move. We tackled a little bit at a time. So we used a lot of carts. We started in one area and then slowly moved ourselves through the media center. It helps, I think, to have established categories ahead of time. When you don't know what categories you want to use, then you can get lost in the weeds. And I also think that one thing that really helped me was I had a cart that was like, I don't know where I'm going to put this book. I'm going to think about it later, and put the book on that cart and then moved on with what I knew and where I wanted it to go. Also, because my media center is so big, I knew that sports were a big circulated item, and I wanted that front and center where I could see it, the kids could see it. I could also watch the turnover of those books.
So I have a couple of questions for you, Carrie. So with your spine labels in particular, did you decide to leave the Dewey numbers on the spine labels, or did you go to a complete word-based classification?
We kept the Dewey spine labels on. We labeled them by their category. So if they were animal, it would say animal, and then we kept the Dewey number below it so that when we were shelving, we knew the books went into the animal section, and then we kept the order of the Dewey system.
When you came up with categories, I know that that's a very challenging part of this process to decide on standard categories. Did you collaborate with others when you were deciding on the categories?
Yes, the library district leaders were instrumental in helping come up with some of the categories. And there's a lot of conversation, a lot of collaboration on that. And as a district, they settled on a set so that it was the same across every school the kids went to. However, it's different middle, elementary, and high.
Okay. So let's hear from a different level. How about Lorraine? Can you provide any details about your process? Because even though there's some standards, it sounds like you had some flexibility to do things, however, was better for your level.
Yes. So for us, it took about 6 months. And like Carrie, we started with weeding. We touched every single book in our nonfiction collection and decided, do we want to keep it? Or we like the topic, but maybe we need to update and get a newer edition, or do we want to categorize it? So every book, we made that decision. We keep it, we update it, or we categorize it. And lots of carts and lots of putting books on the carts. And then once we figured out where the books went, we started to put them back on the shelves. There were a lot that we were undecided on, and so we kept those on a cart. And when the students came back in the fall, we asked for their input and said, where would you put this? Where would you look for this book? And that was very helpful to have student ownership in the process.
Great. So I would love to hear the elementary perspective. Nicole?
We also started with weeding, as everyone else did. That's crucial. And then I did mine at the end of the school year over the summer. So it didn't take as long as it did for the other two. The last 2 weeks when the kids were returning our books, we decided to pick the sections that we had the biggest amount of books, animals, history, and we went from there. And then my clerk would change them in our library manager, and we'd put them on carts first with their section. And I followed what Carrie did with the words going down the spine label because my students will eventually go to her when they finish 5th grade. And I wanted to keep consistency. Once all of them were all on carts, we had so many carts going across the media center with each section. We put them all on the shelves.
So a lot of librarians have different library catalogs they use nationally and internationally. How hard was it, Nicole, when you were talking about updating in the catalog? What types of things did you have to do in the catalog? Because some people might be nervous about that part.
Well, we didn't change the Dewey. We left all that the same in the system, but we just updated the location of each item to its category. So it'd be $5.99 with the author's last name, but the location would be animals. So it wasn't very difficult. We would scan all the barcodes into like a list and then upload the list into the library manager. It was very seamless.
So back to Carrie, I have one more question for middle school, because I believe, Carrie, you were one of the first ones in your district to move to this. So when you were deciding categories and subcategories, how detailed did you go into the subcategories? Do you have a lot of subcategories? Because I think that's where a lot of people have some flexibility if they want to be creative.
I do have some subcategories, but not all the main categories are divided up. The highest used categories are, or the densest categories are. So for me is definitely subcategorized by sport and by athlete biography. Some of the science categories would be subcategorized, and the animals are the three big ones.
I have a couple more questions about that. With your signage, what did you have to do in order to help students find the books in the new categorization?
I have large posters with directional signs to tell them which side of the library that main category or topic is. And then on the shelves, we've really tried to dynamically shelf the books with a big picture above the shelf of what's there, forward-facing books, and smaller signs on each shelf. So if you're looking at my sports section, you see sports above it, but then you will see baseball, basketball, soccer, football, all the big categories. So when the kids are looking, so you go down the stairs and right in front of you, there's the big map that'll say, okay, I want sports. I need to go to the right. And they can see where the sports section is, and they can dig down into what their interests are. B2, like Lorraine, have a lot of languages. Nicole mentioned 38. They come to my school. So having pictures and not just words, but the picture of the basketball or the picture of the science speaker or the picture of the globe or the countries helps the kids find what they're looking for. And then with forward-facing books, I find in those smaller categories, those are the books that are checked out first because they're visual. The kids see them.
So, Carrie, I know that you were a pioneer in the district, and it took you about a year because you slowly moved to this process. But I'd like to hear from Lorraine and Nicole. Again, you were fairly new in the district to do this, but if you were recommending to other school librarians, how much time from beginning to end do you think a school librarian needs, and why? What were the hardest parts that would take a lot more time as opposed to other parts of the process that maybe don't take as much time? Could we talk? Nicole, go ahead.
It would depend if you did it during the school year or in the summer like I did. We worked on it the last 2 weeks of school. My clerk and I came in 2 full days over the summer, and then we took 2 weeks at the beginning of the school year. So 4 weeks total.
Okay. Lorraine, how about you?
Like Nicole, I also started or worked during the summer. So when final exams were happening in May, that's when we were sorting and categorizing. And then we really finished up probably in December with putting everything back on the carts, figuring out our labels, figuring out our signage. So flexibility was huge. We thought we were going to go one way with signage, and then we decided, nope, we absolutely need visuals, even at the high school, to help guide our students to where they want to go.
So Carrie and Nicole have both mentioned a couple of categories, so I am going to put you on the spot, Lorraine. But what's an example of some nonfiction categories for a high school collection?
Cooking and food, crime and forensics, and sports. And what's really interesting is the cooking and food, since it's at the beginning of the alphabet, is the first shelf that you see. And our cookbook circulation has gone through the roof. They just really gravitate towards the cookbooks, which is awesome.
Lorraine, we found that too. Our cookbook circulation, I just couldn't keep enough cookbooks on the shelf.
Same.
Awesome.
I've had to find more.
Oh, I needed those when I was younger because I don't like to cook. But you guys are naturally leading me into the impact of this implementation. What have you seen? I mean, you can speak to circulation, but what have you seen from students or heard from students as a result of this? So I'll go ahead and go back to you, Lorraine.
They're browsing. They're walking around and they are grabbing the books. They're looking at the front cover, especially in high school. They'll tend to come into the media center and then sit. So we're high school, but I love that this model, it just encourages them to walk around and be curious and wonder and interact with the shelving. We do a lot of dynamic shelving as well. So they're browsing and it's awesome.
Great. What about you, Nicole? At the elementary level, what have you seen as the impact?
Students are more independent in finding their own books. I mean, we have 7-year-olds that know exactly where to go to find their dinosaur books or their cookbooks or those Minecraft books that they want. They don't use the catalog to search as much because they know exactly where to find everything.
It's great. I mean, and that's a skill in itself. All our students don't have to do a search on the catalog, because we know where we go when we go to a bookstore or our public library. We know where our sections are. And Carrie, at the middle school, what impact have you seen?
I agree with both of them. I've noticed that there's a lot more browsing happening and the kids are not using the computer to find where a book is. So they know exactly where to go. They know what they like. And then again, as Nicole will say, I have not had to go up and down the stairs a million times to find where 755.63 is. I can say it, go down and find the sign. And that has been helpful for me and my clerk with such a large library that the kids are just a lot more independent and don't need the help finding a book.
Yeah, it sounds like they find what they're looking for, and then they also come across something they're interested in that they didn't know that they were going to find in that section. And I have one more insight. I'm peaking today already. It kind of reminds me of findability reminds me of like refining your search when you teach students how to search on Google or a database. You start with a broad topic and then they learn to narrow down. They're really doing the same thing when they go to the shelf. So I can't imagine how positive this is for your spaces. So I love this.
It's been great. And data has shown that there has been more circulation of nonfiction books this year than the prior year.
Same at my school.
I think for high school, a lot of students saw nonfiction as the research section. And now it's where I go to be curious. It's where I go to find information about topics that I'm curious about. And I think findability is the reason for that.
Nicole, I understand that you were part of the Leadership Council for your district. Can you speak to the district support you received during your pilot phase and how that Leadership Council may have helped you form a process and parameters for your project?
Absolutely. Our district library leaders were very instrumental. They set up a Teams chat when we were going through the process, and we were able to show a picture of the book or tell them what the book was and where would you guys put this? So it wasn't just left on us. We can get feedback and collaborate with other librarians that were also in this pilot phase. And being on the Leadership Council, we were split up into our perspective levels and came up with categories as a group so that they would be standard across the district. Each of us came up with around 28 to 30 categories at each level. Some of them overlap, some of them don't, because I don't imagine animals would be in a high school, but I could be wrong. But it was just great. If you move schools or if you go, you'll see the same categories are all around the whole district so that you're not going rogue. We're not doing it on our own. We have support and a team. And it was great because there are a lot of, I don't know where this is going to go. And it's good to have that feedback.
It's good to have a second opinion or another brain. Sometimes you doubt yourself, but now you all will be serving as mentors as more schools move to this model in your district, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So as we wrap up today's episode, it's clear that each of you are more than just keepers of books, because, we still have that stereotype for some reason. But I want to remind you, you're all dynamic educators because you're willing to evolve to meet the ever-changing needs of your patrons. So I say thank you for that.
And also, Findability has become another innovative way that our profession can ensure that school libraries remain the hubs of learning and community in schools. And thank you again for joining us to further explore this topic of findability and fostering a love of reading and learning for students.
Happy to be here.
Thank you for having us on. This is a topic we're really excited about, so we're glad to share it.
Thank you. So, Julie, we exchanged ideas during the interview. It's time for our recap. So I think we did a pretty good job with having 3 guests at once. We navigated it pretty well. I definitely think it sounds so formal, but we really wanted to be intentional about each level having time to share.
Absolutely. And since we interviewed the public librarians a couple of months ago who gave us the background and the process for which the public library followed, it really was great to hear the perspectives of the school librarians. I think a main point of the podcast is that before jumping into the findability model, it is super important to collaborate with others in your district to align main categories vertically, K through 12, or at least agreeing on some type of standard that provides consistency for the district's patrons. We know this is not a one-size-fits-all model at each level.
Right. Well, you don't want to end up with too many categories. And the way that it was set up was as the collection grew or evolved, or maybe there's new subjects, they could always add new subcategories. I feel like word-based classification will become long-standing practice since it encourages exploration and aligns with having a student-centered space. A couple of times they talked about how their students were thinking about what they wanted to read and how they were interacting with the books on the shelves.
Well, and it definitely saves time by freeing up the librarian to be in that reader advisory role instead of constantly training on how to find the books. So, a lot can be done before the books are actually moved and labeled. The thought process and the weeding process can take some time before actually jumping into the catalog or into moving books to new locations. Weeding is key to success. If you have an older library collection, you may have to have a plan for renewing some of the heavily weeded categories. There's nothing more eye-opening than visual gaps in your collection if you've committed to categories that don't have a lot of books in them.
I'm not sure if it's just me, but anytime we undertake a project in the library, it seems like weeding is the first.
Sure is.
Number one.
It is.
I do like that the elementary school, Nicole wanted to stay aligned with what her students would see in the middle school. And Carrie and Lorraine both mentioned how they fell in love with this model when they visited the public library. And so I just wanted to remind everyone why it is so important to find time to visit other schools in your district or close by or your public libraries, because you gain something. You get a fresh idea every time you visit another library space, including signage or the layout of furniture or even their book displays.
And Lorraine really had a great high school perspective of the students being able to search for books that interest them rather than that traditional reason that involves research. It really is a shift in perspective.
Oh, yeah. She said the high schoolers always associated that nonfiction section of that's just where I go when I have to do research.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're realizing they can be curious about topics to read too. And she mentioned how it's helped the multilingual learners. I mean, all of them mentioned, I think at the high school level, Lorraine said most of her students spoke Spanish, and the other 2 schools have over 38 languages. The signage, the visual cues, the grouping of the books really reduced barriers for those young readers and those multilingual learners.
Well, and we know the goal of any library is always for students to find the just right book. Sounds like for these school librarians, the findability model has helped them meet that very important goal.
Yes. Change in libraries can feel overwhelming, but all 3 librarians, they did it. They survived this process, and they did it in different ways, using the same process, but a different timeline. So just as a reminder, start small, stay curious, and know that every step toward accessibility is a step toward a deeper impact. If you would like access to the findability categories from this interview, please email us at libraryexchangepodcast@gmail.com, and we look forward to you tuning in next time.
Make sure to visit our website at www.libraryexchangepodcast.com.
You'll find episode notes and links. You can even submit your questions or inspiring stories that may be featured on the podcast.
If you're looking for some swag for your library or book-loving friends, visit libraryexchange.etsy.com.
That's a lot of URLs, so I'm glad you had to say all of that, Julie.
Thanks for joining us. We can't wait to have you back for our next episode of Library Exchange.